For this segment is, what is language and why is human language so powerful? One might argue that defining what language is in fact quite simple, and that language is, as the Oxford Dictionary suggests, the method of human communication, either spoken or written, consisting of the use of words in a structured and conventional way. In this sense, language is defined as a linguistic system based upon words and the combination of words into sentences, which is governed by grammatical rules. When we learn a language, we usually start out by learning words and what they mean. We find out that the same word might have several different meanings. For example, we know that the word rock can mean a mineral, a type of music, or an action, as in rocking a baby. As we become more proficient with our language learning, we also discover that the word rock can be used in a metaphorical sense to describe someone who is strong and reliable. In the course of our study, we also learn how to make new words: rocks, rocked, rocking. And we learn how to put words together correctly so that we know that the mother rocked the baby, not the baby that rocked mother. In other words, when we learn language, we also learn the grammatical rules of how it is put together, and we do this instinctively in our first language. However, defining language in this way is rather a simplistic way to view what is a very complex aspect of being human and learning to communicate. How, for example, do we know that the greeting, "Hello, how are you?" is most commonly expected to cue a response along the lines of, "Fine, thanks," rather than a lengthy explanation of the back pain you've been suffering for the past 2 weeks? And yet we also know that if the same question is put to us by a doctor, it is exactly this kind of in-depth explanation of our pain that is required. How do we know that using the greeting, "Hi there, mate," to greet a prospective employer for the first time might not get us the job? It is questions of this kind that have led to a field of linguistic inquiry which takes a much broader view of language and does not restrict itself to examination of spoken and written language, but rather takes into account other influences on communicative events, such as nonverbal behaviour, personality, context, the relationships between participants, our culture and belief systems, amongst other things. This broader way of conceptualising language and the role that it plays in society is not new. As far back as ancient Greece, philosophers such as Socrates and Plato pondered on the relationship between words, concepts, and social reality, and the ways in which language could or could not represent ideas and concepts that existed independently of and prior to the acquisition of language. In the 18th century, Rousseau argued that language originated from emotions, while Kant in the 19th century held that language derived from rational and logical thought. By the 20th century, Wittgenstein, amongst others, viewed the study of philosophy as the study of language. More recent functional approaches to language have evolved to take a sociological approach. This approach argues that humans are essentially social beings, and that language has developed in the way that it has because of the uses to which it is put, and because of the social situations in which people find themselves and need to interact. It's not my intention to advance a philosophical view of language in this segment, but rather to suggest that definitions of what language is are far from clear-cut. My own approach as an applied linguist, who is both a lecturer and a communications practitioner, is to focus not so much on what language is, but rather to highlight the instrumentality of language with respect to what people do and achieve with it in social interaction. It is this outcome-oriented view of language that I would argue makes human language so powerful. To look at this in a bit more detail, we can see how in our day-to-day interactions we communicate both verbally and non-verbally to convey information and to arouse emotions. We exchange and share knowledge, beliefs and opinions. We express emotions such as love, hate, desire and indifference. And in this context, it is easy to see the power of language in phrases such as "I love you" or "I hate you." We can smile to communicate boredom or joy. We can scream to express pleasure or pain. We can bang our fists on a table in anger or to emphasise an important point. We can pause or hesitate to show uncertainty or misunderstanding. We can sigh to show sadness or fatigue, and so the list goes on. In each case, the messages we convey to one another shape and are shaped by our worldview and the relationships that we develop. At another level, language is the essential component of all culture and all enterprise. As an example, think about how elders in societies with an oral tradition use stories to pass down their history and customs to the next generation. Without language, the achievements of the older generation would be lost, and their experiences would not be available to be built upon. In fact, the modern world as we know it would simply not exist. In our working lives, we recognise particular institutional orders. That is, the activities and types of interaction developed over time that supply us with tacitly held knowledge about what is institutionally appropriate language and the expected rules and conduct of the workplace. Think, for example, about legal language and how a courtroom operates, or medical language and what defines a doctor-patient consultation, or educational language and how this is currently shaping the way in which I'm delivering this segment to you. Ultimately, language is a treasured creative resource, and what makes it so powerful is that it is not an end in itself, but rather a means to an end of understanding who we are and what society is like.